This video is an update to my last video. For part 1, check the description and the pinned comment. Update 3. I spoke to my little brother last night. He actually came to me rather than the other way around. I feel bad for that because it shouldn't have been his responsibility. I was trying to figure out what to say. He was just asking if I was okay after arguing with Mike. Obviously it's not usual for me to stay with my parents. However, I got the impression there were things he was holding back. I apologized for Mike's behavior at Christmas and I asked him if he'd noticed Mike behaving strangely or making him uncomfortable before now. He said yes, he thinks Mike has been acting differently around him since he came out. He mentioned the very intrusive personal questions as an example and I agreed that it was completely inappropriate for Mike to talk to him like that. He said he didn't want to make a big thing of it because he knows some straight people get overly curious. He didn't seem fully convinced by that. I told him I was very concerned about how Mike was speaking to him and behaving around him and I asked him if he'd done or said anything else to make him uncomfortable. He said there was nothing big and he didn't want to imagine Mike would ever do that or view him in that way. He said he has felt uncomfortable at times at things he's said or the way he's been looking at him or talking to him, but he felt bad for feeling that way. I tried to reassure him that he's done nothing wrong and it's completely unacceptable for Mike to treat him that way, and he isn't wrong to feel uncomfortable. I tried to encourage him to open up but he didn't want to. I had no idea how much to tell him about what Mike said because I didn't want to upset or worry him. I told him Mike and I are no longer together and I asked him to tell me if Mike tries to contact him in any way because I'm concerned about his behavior and his lack of respect for Tim's boundaries. I brought up social media to remind Tim to be cautious about his privacy settings and block Mike. I asked if Mike ever interacted with his social media and he said no. I didn't want to bring up that I'd seen Mike looking at his Instagram because Tim was already upset and worried, but I thought the important thing was just to make sure he's safe for now. Tim kept apologizing. I tried my best to be reassured that none of this is his fault. I'm furious with Mike for putting him through this. I asked him if he had anyone he feels comfortable talking to and he mentioned the boy who he had over at Christmas. He confirmed they are dating. He said he's been very supportive and he was concerned by how Mike was acting. I don't feel like I've handled it well, but I hope he at least knows he can talk to me. My parents have gone away for the weekend so I haven't discussed it with them yet. Relevant comments. 1. I agree that it isn't just about me. I can only describe things from my own perspective. Keeping my brother safe is obviously by far the most important thing. My fiance's behavior is absolutely disgusting. As well as feeling violated, my brother is clearly hurt. He saw my fiance as family. Of course, I'm not going to hide it from our parents. I can predict how they are going to react. My stepdad isn't generally an angry person, but this situation goes well beyond what anyone would be willing to tolerate. I'm too disgusted by my fiance to feel any concern for his well-being. I'm more worried about my stepdad getting into trouble. I realize they deserve to know the truth. I'm just cautious about the possible impact. 2. That's true. I'm asking him to open up to me, but at the same time I'm keeping things from him. I wish I could protect him, but minimizing or sugarcoating doesn't achieve that. My brother understandably didn't want to believe the worst, but apparently his BF thought it was obvious what Mike's issue was, that he had a thing for my brother and was jealous, and was baffled that no one seemed to be acknowledging it. I'm glad he's supportive and that my brother can open up to him. I find it so sad because he should get to feel happy and excited about dating someone he likes, but instead he's having to deal with this mess. 3. Currently I feel like I hate him. I'm sure it will feel more complicated as I process what has happened and the end of our relationship, but I'm genuinely disgusted. I see how I sounded wishy-washy, but I truly don't want any type of relationship with him going forward. The fact that my brother is now 18 is almost irrelevant to me. He's a kid and he saw my fiancé as family. Mike contacted me and said that he wanted to talk but would prefer to explain himself in writing first to allow him to express himself more calmly. He said, I know what you think this is and I understand why, but I promise it's not like that. In his email he said he experienced confusion about his sexuality when he was a teenager. He had a difficult experience, rejection and losing a friendship, and ended up never addressing those feelings and trying to hide and ignore that aspect of himself. He said that Tim coming out brought out a lot of confusing feelings, and he admitted that he did initially believe he was attracted to Tim, jealous of people Tim was interested in, and he admitted he did think about him sexually. He said he never would have acted on this and he was disgusted with himself for thinking that way. He said he now realizes that he is envious because he regrets never exploring when he was Tim's age, and seeing him now makes him feel bitter, especially seeing him with his boyfriend. He apologized for his behavior and for lashing out the way he did. He wanted me to speak to him before I spoke to Tim or my family, which I didn't agree to. Ultimately, the fact that he has been struggling with his sexuality doesn't change the fact that he has been experiencing sexual attraction to my teenage brother and has been speaking to him inappropriately and having angry outbursts. After I received the email, I spoke to Tim. I apologized for Mike's behavior at Christmas and I asked him if he'd noticed Mike behaving strangely or making him uncomfortable before now. He said yes, he thinks Mike has been acting differently around him since he came out. He mentioned the very intrusive personal questions as an example without any prompting. I agreed that it was completely inappropriate for Mike to talk to him like that. He said he didn't want to make a big deal over it because he knows some straight people get overly curious, but he didn't seem fully convinced by that. I told him I was very concerned about how Mike was speaking to him and behaving around him, and I asked him if he'd done or said anything else to make him uncomfortable. He said there was nothing big and he didn't want to imagine Mike would ever do that or view him in that way. He said he has felt uncomfortable at times at things he's said or the way he's been looking at him or talking to him, but he felt bad for feeling that way. I tried to reassure him that he's done nothing wrong and it's completely unacceptable for Mike to treat him that way, and he isn't wrong to feel uncomfortable. I tried to encourage him to open up, but he didn't want to. At the time, I wasn't sure how much information to give him because I didn't want to overwhelm him. I told him Mike and I are no longer together, and I asked him to tell me if Mike tries to contact him in any way because I'm concerned about his behavior and his lack of respect for Tim's boundaries. I brought up social media to remind Tim to be cautious about his privacy settings and block Mike. I asked if Mike ever interacted with his social media and he said no. I didn't want to bring up that I'd seen Mike looking at his Instagram because Tim was already upset, and I thought the most important thing was just to make sure he's safe for now. I asked him if he had questions or wanted to know more, and he was definite that he didn't. He kept apologizing. I did my best to reassure him that none of it is his fault. After he'd had a little time to process what we had already discussed, I asked if we could talk more and he agreed. To keep it brief, he is now aware of everything I have discussed in my post and my updates. My mom and stepdad are also aware. It was an extremely difficult conversation. Tim is confused and hurt. Our parents are understandably furious. I had expected them to be angry with me for putting Tim at risk, but fortunately they weren't, at least not outwardly. Everyone is feeling a lot of guilt. Tim is blaming himself regardless of how much we reassure him. My parents and I are blaming ourselves for not recognizing what was happening. Tim was adamant that Mike hadn't done anything else that we aren't already aware of. However, the way he expressed this was by saying things like it was nothing serious or it was stupid really. He admitted that there were multiple occasions that he felt uncomfortable because Mike got far too close, was looking at him very intently, or put his hand on his leg or touched his face. He said it felt very uncomfortable, but he didn't think it was enough to be certain that he was being inappropriate. I have ended my relationship with Mike. Initially he was calm and said he understood. However, I've since had to clearly explain that I am not the right person to provide him with emotional support right now. I gave him a couple of suggestions of people or services he could speak to, and I have now blocked him. Where possible, I'm hoping to deal with the practical matters like our tenancy through a third party. I want as little contact with him as possible. I haven't thought about what to say to mutual friends. However, my closest friends are people I met through work who don't know him well, so I won't be isolated. That's about all I can say. I appreciate the advice and support I received. Relevant comments. 1. Yes, he sent multiple drunken texts and tearful voicemails throughout the night after we spoke, all about how ashamed he is and how disgusting he feels. I'm most definitely not the person to look to for reassurance. Luckily my phone was on silent and downstairs. I've been blunt with him, but I've tried very hard not to be unnecessarily cruel because I don't think that will help matters or make me or especially Tim feel any better. Tim is a very gentle person and hates anyone being hurt. He's already worried sick and feeling responsible even though he shouldn't. He had already blocked Mike on everything, luckily, because I'm certain he would have tried to contact him too to try and offload his guilty conscience, which is the last thing Tim needs. Mike doesn't seem especially interested in how I'm feeling or the fact that the relationship is over. I know that's not the most important thing, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt on top of everything else. 2. Comment about Tim. I'll suggest it. It's something he seems to find difficult. I think it could be related to how his mother treated him. I don't know if it would be classed as abuse, but he's always been a cute kid and she was determined for him to be a child star. She was very pushy and it seemed like she treated him like a doll or a fashion accessory instead of an individual with his own personality and preferences. It must have been a weird way to grow up, and I'm sure it did some damage. My stepdad ended up getting full custody and he barely has contact with her now. 3. Comment about Mike. I completely agree. Honestly, I know this might sound callous, but there's a limit to how sympathetic I can be about his confusion with his sexuality. We live in a metropolitan area of a country that's generally accepting of same-sex attraction. He has good relationships with his family. They aren't remotely religious and aren't particularly traditional. He comes from a wealthy background and he is very financially privileged, so therapy would have been easily affordable and accessible. He has supportive friends. He has a supportive partner. Of course, I know that none of this means that coming to terms with something like this is easy, but he had plenty of options that didn't involve harming my brother. Update 4. I am posting because I'm desperate for advice on how I can support my brother. To be clear, he is now accessing therapy from a trained professional. I'm just looking for advice on how I might approach repairing our personal relationship, which has definitely been damaged. The main issue is that my brother blames himself for Mike's behavior, and anytime we spend time together he winds up getting upset and apologizing. He is trying his best to appear like everything is fine, but he is not his normal self and he is avoiding people when he is normally very social. I desperately want him to feel comfortable around me again, but I don't know how to encourage this. If anyone has any suggestions of things I can try, please let me know.